What's going on, guys? This is Mikeinoid, and today we are once again going to talk about the Nintendo Switch Lite. If you don't know, around this time of the year, I look back and review everything about the Switch Lite and go over why I believe it is a good handheld gaming console. But now that the Switch Lite is 6 years old, there's one major event that should affect your decision on purchasing or even keeping your Switch Lite, and that, of course, is the release of the Nintendo Switch 2. The Switch 2 is the sequel to the Nintendo Switch line that is more powerful and offers an exclusive lineup of games. The Switch 2 just released back in June, which was over 3 months ago, so it's still very early in its life cycle. But what should you do? Buy into the future or hang out a bit in the past? Let's go over and compare the Switch Lite to its successor, the Switch 2. I believe the biggest difference between these two systems is size. The Switch 2 is fucking huge when you place it against a Switch Lite. Even in weight, the Switch 2 is noticeably heavier than a Switch Lite. I mean, it makes sense. The Switch 2 is a more powerful and capable system, but damn, this takes up a lot of space in your backpack. The Switch Lite is way more compact, and it even fits in my pocket. You really can't say that about a lot of portable devices nowadays, so the Switch Lite being a lot more travel friendly, I say it makes it way more attractive. What's also attractive about the Switch Lite is that it is cheaper than a Switch 2. Here in the US, the Switch 2 is about $250 to $300 more than the Switch Lite, depending on which Switch 2 you end up picking up, because you have the console by itself, or you can get the one that has Mario Kart World included, or eventually the bundle with Pokemon Legends ZA. Either way, it's expensive as shit. Now, the price for a new Switch Lite here in the US has risen due to tariffs. They were originally $200 but are now $230. It's not a gigantic price jump, but it's still kind of annoying. This system has been $200 for almost 6 years, and the fact I would need to pay an extra $30 if I wanted one now, it just makes me kind of sad. Personally, I wouldn't buy one new until they lower that bitch back to $200, or at least sweeten the deal a little bit by including some sort of game with it. Even then, Nintendo released Animal Crossing versions that included the full game of Animal Crossing New Horizons, and that was still $200. I don't know, man. Tariffs made shit complicated to buy new game systems nowadays, but who said you had to buy them new? If you look around in your area on Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp, you should be able to find some good deals on a Switch Lite. Yeah, they may look a little used, but they may bundle the system with some accessories or a couple of games, which is enough to get you started. Second-hand market for the win. It's also kind of crazy that you're buying a device that has better battery life for less money. Once again, the Switch 2 is a more demanding system, so battery life took a big hit in order to run games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, but only getting a little over 2 hours at best before you need a charge is not that great. Switch Lite gets over 3.5 hours if you're playing something intense. I think that's a more reasonable time. Obviously, the battery life for both can be better, but for the Switch Lite, you would want the battery to give you a decent amount of playtime since you will only be playing portably. This is a very small benefit for the Switch Lite, but I thought I would mention it anyways. The Switch Lite is available in 10 different colors and themes. As of the time of making this video, the Switch 2 is only available in all black with the red and blue Joy-Con controllers. Literally everyone is going to have this color for a while until Nintendo puts out different console variations and controllers. You have options with the Switch Lite, including the beautiful Legend of Zelda Switch Lite. Alright, finally, now we can give the Switch 2 some time to shine here. The Switch 2 can be docked and play games on the TV, and depending on the game, you can play in 4K, you can play in 120 frames per second. The Switch Lite, yeah, that shit ain't doing anything. Unfortunately, Nintendo made it impossible to connect the Switch Lite to a TV. Not only was there no official dock made, but no third-party docks will do the trick since the Switch Lite doesn't have that technology in it. So even though the Switch Lite is a great handheld option, you're locking yourself from ever playing on a TV. So if you have just an itch to hook up a Switch to the TV, the Switch 2 will scratch that itch. The Switch Lite has built-in controls, while the Switch 2 has the detachable Joy-Con 2 controllers. These Joy-Con 2 controllers are kind of expensive, so if they ever got damaged or lost, they are going to leave your wallet dried up. However, if something were to happen to the Switch Lite controls or even the system itself, you will need to get the entire system fixed or replaced. Depending on what the issue is, say the left joystick started to drift, that would be an inexpensive fix but would require you to take the system apart. I mean, I know a lot of people aren't trying to do all that. So while yes, Joy-Con 2 controllers are expensive, you can always just replace the controllers while the system itself is perfectly fine. I've mentioned multiple times now that the Switch 2 is a more powerful console than the Switch, but what does that actually mean? Well, the Switch 2 can run more demanding games that the Switch can't or would run extremely poorly, and the Switch 2 can run existing games better. Nintendo has put out both free and paid updates that improve the performance of their first-party exclusives on Switch 2. And even if there isn't an update, there's still a chance for games to have a stable frame rate when played on Switch 2. Both Switch Lite and Switch 2 allow you to play the massive library of Switch games, so I guarantee you that you will find something to play. There are a couple of Switch titles that require Joy-Cons to play, such as Super Mario Party, Ring Fit Adventure, and 1-2-Switch. These can play on a Switch Lite, but you will need to buy a pair of Joy-Cons if you don't have any. And while pretty much every Switch game is backwards compatible on the Switch 2, there is a small list of games that have some issues or have trouble playing at all. So you may want to go through this list before you commit to a Switch 2. Of course, if you do buy a Switch 2, you will have access to both Switch 1 and Switch 2 games. As of now, not much is out, but you will be able to play the latest Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon games when they release exclusively on the Switch 2. Or you can be the guy that has to stare at the screen when you put a Switch 2 game in a Switch Lite. Man, that's just sad. Everyone has different preferences and opinions, so ultimately, it's going to be up to you. Do you go with the Switch Lite or a Switch 2? If you want the most bang for your buck, then it's got to be the Switch Lite. Not only can you afford the console, but you can actually get a good selection of games, especially if you go the second-hand route. But if you want the more powerful hardware, the ability to dock to the TV, and you are confident in what Nintendo and third-party companies are going to bring to the table, then I say go with the Switch 2. Or a good third option is to take advantage of the low-cost entry point of the Switch Lite, and if you enjoy the Switch library and want more, you can sell the Switch Lite and use the money towards a Switch 2. As someone that has both consoles for whatever reason, I'd say both are good for what they are. But what about the Switch and Switch OLED? Alright, no further questions. Well, that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know which Switch system you prefer down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and of course, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. This is probably the best special edition of the Switch ever made, man.
Question for you out there, do you honestly just like it? I get the feeling that this not the case. Poker face, everyone has the right to go and see the other side. So break down the barricade before it